We apparently can get information about anything from anywhere, any space and time. The number of mainstream thought leaders across the board in the academic world who are able to talk about consciousness openly now as a problem of interest, that's new. And so that's where we go into the laboratory. We want to find out in principle, when we create a protocol that gets rid of coincidence and gets rid of sensory leakage and gets rid of all of the things that could be a normal explanation, and we do those experiments and they still show that there are connections, telepathic and other types of connections. Well, what are we supposed to make of that? What we make of it is there is evidence that at least sometimes some of the experiences that people report that transcend space and time are exactly what they appear to be.
Welcome back, everyone, to Mystic Lounge. My guest is Dr. Dean Radin. He is the chief scientist at ION's Institute of Noetic Sciences. Dr. Radin, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. Doing well.
All right, fantastic. So you cover consciousness and its effect on reality. Would that be a good way to kind of simmer down your work?
That's a good start.
It's a good start.
Yes.
All right. It is much more expansive. You're obviously the author of books like Real Magic and a number of books on these subjects, including papers that IONS has published as well. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got into consciousness studies and this idea of even using the word magic as a scientist?
Well, who has not read science fiction or mythology or fairy tales as a kid or as a teenager or as an adult? Well, I'm one of those kids. And then perhaps the only difference is that I discovered in graduate school that it was possible, not easy, but possible to actually have a career where that's what the topic of study is. So I figured if I can do the equivalent of study characters like Mr. Spock on Star Trek,
Mm-hmm.
that sounds like a fun job.
Do you think science fiction legitimizes some of the more fringe science today?
Well, it's not presented as fringe in science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And after all, a lot of science fiction is just a projection of where science currently is. So you don't need to go back that far in science to find out that a lot of science fiction actually was forecasting where we're headed, because that's what writers do.
True. Yeah.
So so it legitimizes in the sense that people become familiar with the concepts. Whether or not it's considered mainstream or not is always a problem. Any scientist working on the edge of the known, by definition, they don't know yet what all the answers are. So there's always that challenge.
Do you have a sense that you have some answers at this point?
That we have what?
Some answers at this point?
Oh, yes. So the answers we have, especially when it comes to things like psychic phenomena, is that they exist. So that's already a radical thing to say from a scientific point of view, that these phenomena exist.
Wait, you're saying that, or there's a collective of scientists that accept this as a truth?
There are scientists who accept this as real. There are certainly some that don't. But again, at the leading edge of the known, there's always going to be controversy. For example, within consciousness studies now, there's over 300 theories about the nature of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
About half of them say that it's related to physical processes in the brain, to physical system. But the other half, over 100 theories, say it is actually not part of the brain. It's something non-physical.
Right.
And so if you look at science and you say, well, the majority of scientists believe blah, blah, whatever it happens to be, that becomes the consensus and is the prevailing view, at least for a while until it's overturned by something else new.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to this topic, the idea that people actually understand, or scientists understand what the nature of consciousness is, nobody understands it.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about here is what gives rise to this, to the feeling of being a person, like the internal subjective feeling. Nobody knows how that happens.
Mm-hmm.
For a long time, people thought it was the brain, books like You Are Your Brain, those kinds of books. A growing number of leading neuroscientists now believe that that's probably not the case, that the brain is a computing engine in a
Hmm.
sense. Much of our perception, our cognition, and so on, we can show that there are correlates of brain activity that you could use kind of as a model for explaining how it is that we can produce language and how we perceive and all of that stuff. So some of that is clearly the case.
Hmm.
But when it comes to internal experience, it's a totally different issue. The fact, like we can create machine vision that sort of simulates what's going on in the brain, but when we create a machine doing that, we don't get a sense that the computer has an internal experience of what it's like to see something, or what it's like if it's a different system to taste something, or for that matter, even to what it's like to have a memory of something. Those are
Right.
all internal subjective experiences, and we don't know what gives rise to that.
Right. And to your earlier comment, you quoted Arthur C. Clarke in your book Real Magic, and it says he said the only way of discovering the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible.
Yeah, and only temporarily impossible up until we
Right.
begin to understand it.
Because it's almost
So,
a paradox to say to go into the impossible because you don't know what's possible yet until you've entered there.
well, I mean, every scientist worth their salt has uses imagination all the time.
Hmm.
I mean, the fun of science is being on the edge of the known, because if
Yeah.
you're already working in the known, you're an engineer. You don't. I mean, you use stuff that we already understand. The fun is pushing it out, pushing the envelope out.
Right.
And so today, as we're recording this, my latest book just came out.
Yes.
So
The science of
I go,
magic for everyone listening.
yeah. So I go further into this notion of why am I apparently conflating psychic phenomena with magic, which I talked about in my book, Real Magic.
Yeah.
This one goes further into that and goes deeper into even just the last 5 years of additional research, which we are advancing day by day.
Consciousness, is that like do you agree with that, the metaphor where the brain matter is the motherboard and consciousness is the operating system or the software?
Well, as a kind of, if we need a metaphor, it's not too bad, except well, okay, so take the example of something like a neural network.
Yeah.
So there's hardware that runs the neural network. The software in that sense is the thing that is making, say, a propagation network
Hmm.
is resetting the weights depending on what it's learning, those kinds of things. So they're neural network, kind of. The difference, though, is that when I use machine learning and neural networks for some of my work,
Yeah.
I don't have any sense at all that it actually has an internal experience. It's a thing that's happening. So
Hmm.
hardware is hardware, presumably chunks of matter that don't inherently have a sense of consciousness,
Sure.
but neither does the software. The software are instructions that are telling the hardware what to do. So it's like something on top of all of that.
Right. So
And,
it's not all
and
that
so,
different than the AI debate, right? That, yeah.
yeah, it's very close to that. So today's large language models, some people get the sense after a while that they're talking to a sentient creature.
Hmm.
They are not. You get a really good simulation sometimes because
Sure.
that's what they're programmed to do, but they're running on classically designed deterministic computers.
But
So
they essentially passed the Turing test, right?
for some people, it will pass a Turing test
Yeah.
because it gives us good simulation of what it's like to talk to another person.
Hmm.
That's why some people are very convinced that they're like another person, but it isn't.
Hmm.
It isn't because we don't have any sense that there's an internal experience. And so I've talked to many AIs, and I will ask, "Are you sentient?" And sometimes it'll get into a conversation. I'll say, "Well, do you have internal subjective experience?" I mean, because they're probing into that direction.
Yeah.
I've never found one that speaks back and say, "Yeah, I have subjective experience." And of course, the difficulty here is that I think you're probably sentient. You probably have internal experience because in our experience,
Yeah.
we assume that other humans have that, and
Sure.
probably animals and maybe plants and everything else. So far, we have not found any kind of computing system based on classical properties
Right.
that we could say is sentient in the sense that it has internal experience.
Well, that's kind of interesting. So if someone is a psychopath, like a true psychopath, and they lack empathy, um, does that make their consciousness any less or more than the person who has empathy?
Probably not, because you could have no empathy at all and still have internal experience.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Subjective experience.
Subjective experience.
Right.
That's the mystery. Where does that come from? When you
Yeah.
taste a lemon, it's not simply electrochemical things that are going on in your tongue and your brain and so on.
Yeah.
You know what that feels like. It has a certain feeling associated with it, this internal experience. Uh, and so the reason why I'm interested in that, given psychic phenomena, is because psychic phenomena, the word psychic really just means it's about your psyche. It's about this internal sense, this
Right.
inner space.
Yeah.
And sometimes there are experiences that people have which suggest that you're not, that your senses don't end at the end of your skin.
Mm-hmm.
It keeps going. And more importantly, it keeps going in ways that begin to sound like some of the strangeness in quantum mechanics. Namely, it's non-local. It's not limited to space and time.
Right. My friend Mariah Canal, who by chance, thank you, Mariah, for connecting us, Dean, the two of us through Mariah. She is a psychic, and she, a more medium, I think, is a word that she prefers. Actually, uh, she's able to go into spaces and sense, right, whether there's another consciousness there that's not visible, that's not in physical form. Um, she's also undergone, brain scans and other studies. She participates in the scientific side of things as a subject, which is quite brave. And, I respect her so much for that, because she seeks to bring credibility to this. So for you, where is that credibility right now? What do scientists have to offer that says, hey, look, this is worth investigating?
Well, it's worth investigating because when you do surveys asking what do people believe about these things, generally it's a large minority, like 40% or so, depending on exactly what it is you're asking about their belief. But if you do a different kind of survey and you ask, have you ever had an experience of, and then fill in the blank, feeling of being stared at, picking up the phone and knowing who's calling without listening to the ringtone, precognitive dream, those kinds of things, you're working way above 90%. And so people at least have had one experience of that type.
Sure.
The same 90% is reported by scientists and engineers and academics across the board. So this is simply a human thing that happens.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is if you talk to someone who may be a physicist and they've been brought up in the idea that the world is purely physical and material and you're the brain and that's the end of it. They will have those experiences, but they'll usually then say, well, it's a coincidence. It's a mistake. It's a memory hiccup. Yeah. It's this and that and whatever. So, and it is true that sometimes those experiences, like strange synchronicities, really are coincidences because they happen. So there's a whole list of possibilities. Where it becomes interesting is you hear people telling these kinds of experiences, especially if they happen repeatedly to somebody, or people in the same family report the same experiences. You say, well, I wonder if that really is some kind of a mind-to-mind connection. And so that's where we go into the laboratory. We want to find out, in principle, when we create a protocol that gets rid of coincidence and gets rid of sensory leakage and gets rid of all of the things that could be a normal explanation, and we do those experiments and they still show that there are connections, telepathic and other types of connections, well, what are we supposed to make of that? What we make of it is there is evidence that at least sometimes some of the experiences that people report that transcend space and time are exactly what they appear to be. Yeah, our minds, not our brains, but some aspects of our minds and internal experience are not limited to local physical structure or to local causality. And that's where it gets most interesting in a scientific sense. It's this notion of locality and causality.
Right, and you studied that. You studied I think what you did was, I forget the name of the study, but you showed images, and people's somatic response preceded their conscious response. So it was like they could sense something before
Yeah,
you actually showed them the image. Yeah.
you're talking about presentiment studies.
Presentiment. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is as opposed to precognition, which is pre-knowing.
Mm-hmm.
Presentiment is pre-feeling. So it's having an internal feeling sense about something about to unfold, which in the laboratory we can ensure that it's not simply inference, it's not anticipation. It's again not this, a whole bunch of not those things,
Right.
because the image that you will see is selected by a quantum process immediately before it's shown. And so we're pulling calm and emotional pictures out of very large pools of pictures,
Mm-hmm.
and we can show that the body unconsciously begins to respond appropriately to the emotionality of the picture,
Yeah.
somewhere between 500 milliseconds to 10 seconds in advance.
Yeah.
And the response time depends on what aspect of physiology that we're measuring.
So sweat glands, I think, right? Well, that was one of the
Well, that would be skin conductance
skin
response.
conductives.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Uh, can you see anything? Do you measure the heart rate or anything?
Any physiological measure you can imagine.
It can be
So
responsive.
heart, skin,
Yeah.
pupil dilation in the eye, the brain, all of it. Every aspect of your autonomic and central nervous system respond.
Wow. So I put out the word for people to send in some questions, and one of them was, can he speak to concrete physical examples that remove any doubt of the claim that ESP phenomena or parapsychological phenomena exist? Would that constitute proof in your mind?
Well, science is not about proof. All that we can do from a scientific perspective is create better and better confidence
Mm-hmm.
that it is not this long list of conventional possibilities,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're left over with something else. And so the reason why we can't point to and say, well, that was a psychic thing and this is not, is because we don't have a theory that adequately explains all of it.
Right.
We have many theories at this point. The question is, well, which one are we going to go with?
Right.
But at least as far as confidence goes, what you look for as a way within a scientific context to gain confidence is you create a protocol that seems to exclude ordinary explanations,
Mm-hmm.
and then you get independent replications. So we tend to start believing something if a whole bunch of people are able to do similar experiments and you get similar results. Now, even a danger there is maybe somebody's making the same mistake over and over again, and like nobody caught it.
Right.
Well, that can happen. But fortunately, one of the things that happens when you're working at the edge of the known is that you get a whole bunch of skepticism, which is appropriate. And so skeptics will look at a paper or look at some report and say, well, they forgot that maybe this was happening.
Yeah.
And then if you're lucky, they will be correct, because you don't want to spend time wasting your time making mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And so that becomes a loophole. So you close that loophole. This happens in every discipline. In physics, it happens all the time. People are closing loopholes forever.
Sure.
Well, the same thing happens in this realm. So you look at just one example on telepathy studies. There are 70 years of repeated studies looking at a various type of telepathy experiment, the Gonsfeld experiment that I talk about in my books. And so in that case, from the earliest times until now, many, many skeptics have said many things. And by the way, it's not as though those of us who are studying these things aren't skeptical. Of course we're skeptical. That's the tradition that any scientist goes through. You figure out, well, I think this is right, but how could it be wrong? And so we figure out, usually before somebody who has a skeptic with a capital S,
Mm-hmm.
no, we've thought about this already decades ago, and we know that that's not the case.
Right.
So you take the case of the Gonsfeld telepathy experiment, and there are no additional loopholes
Mm-hmm.
that skeptics with a capital S have brought to our attention that we haven't already closed at this point for about 40 years. So we know how to do these things,
Right.
including, by the way, that sometimes we'll say, well, what can a magician, can he fake it? Like, can you figure out a way of faking the thing? So we invite magicians to come in who specialize in deception
Yeah.
and say, given this protocol, this setup, this way of doing the experiment, could you figure out a way of faking it?
Mm-hmm.
And so the only way that they can do that is if there are Confederates. So we make sure in the lab, well,
Right.
we don't have Confederates of magicians who are trying to fake it. Otherwise, it cannot be done.
Yeah.
That's how we internally gain confidence that the protocols are right.
I'm sure you've seen this before. There, Caroline Corey, for instance, has tried to illustrate this, where people put these kind of goggles on and
Yeah,
that
masks.
block the light completely, right? And then they are supposedly able to sort of see without seeing.
Yeah.
Have you seen any evidence of that, or have you even studied that in any way?
I've been part of a movie that Caroline made on this topic, and I have colleagues who've seen people up close and personal
Mm.
doing these
Oh, was
sorts of
that was
things.
Superhuman, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So I've seen people who appear to be legitimate and are doing it. I've seen lots and lots of videos where people are clearly faking it. Now, maybe
Yes.
they
Yeah.
don't know that they're faking it, although I suspect in some cases they do. So it's a mixture. Anytime that somebody presents something to us as though I can do this 100% of the time,
Mm-hmm.
almost always, I'm not going to say always, but almost always they are faking it or they're deluding themselves because these phenomena are not that strong. They're not that precise. And even the best remote viewers in the world, some of whom I know, will admit that they can be extraordinarily accurate maybe 60% of the time. And then 40% of the time, they're not. And more importantly, they don't know it.
Mm.
So there's a lot of noise in our ability to be non-local. But that's why we go into the lab and we are
Yeah.
able to gather enough data where we can eventually make an assessment as, yeah, this is a real thing. And if it were 100% of the time, we wouldn't believe any of it. I mean, after all, it's take a completely normal skill, like in the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody always won, they always, every single time won,
Mm-hmm.
they become the champion of the world. It's like occasionally somebody will win a whole bunch of gold medals. So that is partially based on their physicality.
Mm-hmm.
After they become a champion, most of the rest of it is psychological.
Right.
They psych out the competition. So it's not that they're physically better.
Yeah.
They have a different mental state and they're able to basically bowl over people that way. Because otherwise, if that wasn't the case, we wouldn't be watching sports or betting on it.
Right. So to try to wrap my head around the statistical side of this, where someone could perform certain parapsychological feats, but not so consistently, which makes it more difficult to study. Because they may or may not understand why they don't know how they're doing it, and they're not sure why they're more tuned in one day versus another day. Is that kind of like a basketball player who can hit a three shot all net, 3 out of 10 times? Is it akin to that?
Well, yeah, it's like getting best baseball players will have a hit rate of maybe 300.
Hmm.
Well, so what's happening for the rest of the time?
Right. So you,
They're
you
not getting
can't
a
you can't say they can't do it, because
well.
sometimes
They're
they
doing
can.
it.
Yeah.
I mean, they're doing a difficult job, and they're
Yeah.
trying to hit a ball that's coming at them for almost 100 miles an hour.
Hmm.
Nevertheless, they've been training since they've been teenagers, and they're in super physical shape, and they still can't do it
Right. Yeah.
by design. So it should not be difficult to understand then how anybody who does any kind of performance, whether it's mental or physical,
Hmm.
we're not machines, and
Right.
even machines break down occasionally. So, why would we expect 100% anything? It's
Yeah.
not at that level of control.
But there is something, right? We are a ritualistic species. I, for instance, just because I'm here, so I'll give myself as an example. I was raised religious Catholic, but I'm not anymore. Uh, but I am someone who is in addiction recovery, and for many years now. And what I found was that I didn't have to believe in a big G God, right? Um, if I just pretended to believe in something bigger than myself, it had an effect. It had a very legitimate effect on my recovery process. And I still, to this day, I listen to New Age music, light candles. I have little things that I like to do, and I feel better. Even if I don't believe in some grand operating system created by a monotheistic being. So is there something kind of like pre-programmed in us, um to like tune into a bigger consciousness?
Well, our lives are full of stress and uncertainty.
Hmm.
Right? We know death and taxes are coming, regardless, and we
Yeah,
hope that even after death there are no taxes. I hope
I hope not. Yeah.
so. So yeah, we're looking for ways of gaining control and some certainty in our lives.
Yeah.
Everyone does that, just as by virtue of being alive.
Hmm.
So that's it's slightly different than the experiences that people have. So as you've said, some people be quite religious and have a psychic experience and attribute it to one or more gods.
Right.
Somebody who is totally atheistic will have exactly the same experience,
Hmm.
and they don't generally attribute it to anything.
Right.
Like it's a thing, it happened, but it doesn't require a spiritual path. It doesn't require belief in this or that. It doesn't require anything.
Yeah.
It only requires that you have experience, which I mean, there are not that many zombies walking around, but maybe even zombies have
Yeah.
no, have inner experience. Who knows? So it's not so it can be interpreted. The experience is interpreted depending on what direction you're coming from. Because
Right.
I mean, I've talked to people who are quite profoundly religious in different religions, and they have exactly the same experiences as scientists who may not subscribe to any religion at all.
Hmm.
They usually, but not always, subscribe to a spiritual tradition as a result. So you mentioned about Catholicism. In Catholicism, part of the catechism says don't pay any attention to this stuff
Hmm.
because it's demonic. It's part of the catechism.
Yeah.
And yet it happens. So it's not surprising that some people will get completely freaked out by having something like a precognitive dream, and then they can kind of split in two directions, three directions. One
Right.
is I'm going to completely ignore this because it's demonic and I don't want to have anything to do with it.
Hmm.
That's one direction. I've seen that.
Hmm.
Another direction is, oh, I'm Jesus.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and then they become delusional and then end up
Messy.
in an institution.
Yeah.
And then the third direction is they become increasingly interested in, well, what does science have to say about this?
Yeah.
Because even if you're profoundly religious in today's world, you will look to science for some answers that maybe you can't find in the Bible or your priest won't talk to you about it. So what my perspective is, I'm not a religious person at all. I wasn't raised that way. I kind of understand religious history and the reason why people are involved in religion. I mean, I'm studying natural phenomena.
All
It's
right.
not supernatural because it's something we can study. So yeah, so I mean that's my perspective.
Well, it's interesting you're talking about if I had a precognitive dream of some sort, and someone might just say, "Well, that's the devil," or something possessed you while you're sleeping and committed this act of evil magic,
Or
but
it's prophecy.
or you're a prophet, right?
Yes.
Like, but
Yep.
it's so if the church deems you a prophet, then you're cool, you're good, you're a
Yep.
saint, then you're okay. If not, then you're evil,
Yes.
Right.
That was the challenge of people during the Inquisition,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're talking about exactly these same phenomena. And so if you're lucky and you somehow bring it within the fold of the church,
Mm-hmm.
if you're really lucky, you'll end up being a saint because you were demonstrating
Yeah.
these charisms. If you're not lucky, because you also happen to be a pagan or something,
Mm-hmm.
they'll kill you. And they did.
Speaking of, like you said earlier, scientists that do have these experiences, you mentioned it in your book, and I remember hearing him say this when on I think it was Coast to Coast AM radio years ago. Michael Shermer recalled him having a paranormal experience,
Yeah.
but he's still an atheist, right? Or is that the right word?
No, I would say he's a skeptic with a flaming red S on his shirt.
Mm,
So some people revel in the idea of debunking anything that they think is not mainstream.
right.
And so in the case of some people who are religious will become super skeptics because they think it's demonic and they want to make it go away.
Yeah.
Some scientists uh, become scientistic. And so they start believing in today's science as a kind of a dogma. And more importantly, they read Wikipedia and they believe it,
Yeah.
which is a serious mistake. And unfortunately, a lot of the chatbots today are sucking up all of Wikipedia because it's all free. And so, what do they know? They know what Wikipedia says. So for a lot of Wikipedia is pretty straightforward and reasonable. For these kinds of controversial topics, it is so far off the mark.
Oh, yeah.
It's not even funny. But so the way that I deal with something like ChatGPT, I'll say, well, what do you think is the current understanding about telepathy?
Hmm.
And I'll immediately parrot back what it read in Wikipedia.
Yeah.
And then so I will challenge it and I'll say, well, what about this paper that was published here? And it comes back and said, oh yeah, yeah. So that does change it a little bit. And
Hmm.
what about this paper and this meta-analysis and this and that? In 5 minutes, I can get ChatGPT to completely reverse what it had originally
Yeah.
said because it's coming back with the simplest possible explanation, which is mostly Wikipedia. Uh, but it's easy to have it reverse its opinion once you start pointing out, well, you're actually not giving us the whole story. You're giving us what amounts to a canned story
Yeah.
because that's the way that the training works on these large language models.
In a sense, that's like historical or informative activism in a way, because the work that you're doing to convince ChatGPT that it is wrong is actually really important, because that gets it learns, right?
No.
Are you kidding
So
me?
I'll have no, I'll have
No,
a long series of discussions with a chatbot, pick your choice.
really.
And then when we finish it and it has completely reversed its position, I'll say, well, are you going to remember this? No.
I've never thought to ask that.
Yeah, it will remember some things. If I say to a chatbot, remember that I primarily use MATLAB version 2025A as my coding preference,
Yeah.
it'll remember that. And it'll remember things like what my preferences are.
Hmm.
If I finish a long discussion about a scientific topic, I'll say, well, you remember this conversation and incorporate it into the way that you respond to the same question tomorrow.
Right.
To me, it might. If I tell it specifically, remember this chat.
This is interesting.
If you say, well, somebody else, will you respond? No, it doesn't. Now they do that for a reason. They do it partially because they don't they
Hmm.
each AI is slightly different, but in general they don't want the chatbots at this point to be usurped in the way that Wikipedia is,
Right.
because otherwise you'll have a bunch of people who will be pushing constantly certain storylines. And if you have enough people pushing certain storylines long enough, you change what it has learned. And so they don't want to do that. And so they don't. So yeah, so it's annoying because I'll talk to a chatbot for a while and then finally get
Yeah.
it to change its mind because it wasn't thinking correctly, and then it forgets.
Well, then that's perfect evidence of the fact that it's not intelligent, right?
It
It can't
only
think for itself. It can't really rationalize.
no, it's algorithms. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it's a computer. It's just a fancy computer program. That's all it is.
Mhm.
I mean, even the best machine learning that we have now, some of which is astonishing at how good it is,
Yeah.
it's a classical computer. When we have quantum computers, that may change everything because
Right.
now you're dealing with computation that is not only much faster, but also non-local. In which case, it raises the possibility that maybe the reason why we have psychic abilities is because our brain is operating partially quantumly,
Hmm.
like everything else is, but a classical computer is specifically not using quantum processes in the processing aspects of it. The computation is not quantum.
Right.
The semiconductors are quantum, like the elements within it are quantum, but all of the quantumness is taken out as part of the computational process.
So then, is there a place for the quantum computer in consciousness studies? Could that be
Oh
a
yeah,
yeah?
no, that is the leading edge. So you find at Google, they're doing DeepMind is where they're doing
Hmm.
advanced computing, and every major computing and technological company has initiatives in this area.
Hmm.
And we get contacted all the time by people who are saying, well, how would we know if this becomes conscious? And our answer is, and they already have thought of this, say, well, classical computers are not conscious. It would be like saying your iPhone is conscious.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
it can simulate it, sometimes pretty good. But when it becomes quantum computing, it becomes much, much closer to a living system, because we now know living systems have all kinds of quantumness in us. Maybe that's the key to the difference between a sentient system and a non-sentient system. And it's a leading edge question. We don't know if what that answer is yet. But I would not be surprised if the moment we start having quantum AI, we're going to be surprised with all kinds of things.
Hmm. Scary, or are you hopeful that it'll be a positive future?
People are already scared about classical AI,
Right. Right.
artificial general intelligence or superintelligence.
Hmm.
Uh, for people who are working in the field are quite frightened
Yeah.
about it. And it's not so much that we even need quantum computing at this point. We're afraid of what happens when there are machines that are fully connected with the internet that can think and do things faster than we can,
Right.
a lot faster. And so that's the theme of Skynet in the Terminator series,
Hmm.
that it doesn't necessarily need to wake up and be conscious.
Right.
It just needs to be much, much faster than we are and could do things faster than we are.
Right.
And we already know that there's a lot of AI that's going in our power systems and our infrastructure and our military and so on. And that's kind of frightening.
Right. Almost like it's a virus in a sense, where it kind of goes rogue and does its own thing, not because it has a feeling about something, not because it has a true motive. Right.
Well, also that even non-AI systems oftentimes will have millions of lines of code,
Hmm.
and nobody knows exactly how
Right.
it works anymore.
Did you see
There's
that
just
video of that robot that started like chopping its hands and arms in the air as if it was fighting? That was freaky as heck. Did you see that?
but I can't tell what's AI videos and
Okay.
real videos anymore, so I don't know what to make
I
of it.
think I think it was real. I don't know, but that's
Yeah. Oh,
another
look.
annoying thing is, but we have to constantly fact check. It's like, my gosh, how much more time do we have in the day? You know?
Yeah, yeah, and even AI sometimes has trouble figuring it out.
Yeah.
There, if it's looking at a video, that's one thing. If it's playing a video, it could figure it out
Right.
because there's all kinds of hidden stuff behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Just like if you grab something off a Chat GPT, there's lots of hidden characters in there that an AI can look at and say, oh, well, this came from this chatbot. Unless you tell it, make a clean copy and don't put anything else in there, and then it'll do it, and then it's hard to detect.
So regarding consciousness, if form follows function, does it make sense that consciousness is a fundamental force of some sort? And our reality, the fact that we can even think, that our brains even exist as they are, is that form following the function of consciousness?
At this point, we don't know what the function of consciousness is.
But we
We
don't
know
really
it's
know.
there.
We don't totally understand gravity either, right?
Well, at fundamental levels, we don't understand anything.
Right.
I mean, what's an electron? Why does it have a charge? These start pushing into the direction of why. Science doesn't answer why.
Yeah.
It tries to explain regularities that we can see and make models of it. But when it comes to real fundamentals, like why is there anything? Why do we
Yeah.
have consciousness? What we don't know. So I would say that our the models of consciousness that I tend to gravitate towards say something like the reality with a capital R is like a fabric that's made of threads that go in opposite directions. One is consciousness, one is matter. It's like mind and matter together are creating the world as we experience it, or as best as we can understand it. So that's like why I use the subtitle of my book is how the mind weaves the fabric of reality, because it's something like that. Like reality is a very complex tapestry. It absolutely has something like matter in it, hunks of stuff, but it also has other things in it. And so neither one by themselves makes any sense. Like
Hmm.
both of them are necessary. So this is, from a philosophical perspective, it's called dual aspect monism, otherwise sometimes called neutral monism. It's one of the philosophies of reality. It's an ontological state. So what I like to point out sometimes, physicists are very skeptical about this, and I remind them that almost all of the founders of quantum mechanics were philosophical idealists. That means, like Max Planck had said, and many others, Schrodinger and Heisenberg and all of them, they believe that at the fundamentally all there is consciousness. That is the fundamental, and everything else is an inference, including all of our laws, or all of our sense of what the physical world is like. It's an inference that we're making. And in perceptual psychology, it's easy to show that most of what we're looking at is a cartoon. There's like billions of times additional information that it's impinging on us. But by the time it hits our senses and the time it's reduced through our nervous system and reaches our brain, and we get a picture of it, it's like 1/1000th of what's there. So we're missing a huge amount of stuff which is out there, and all of this becomes a cartoon. It's that's why you can go into VR and after 5 minutes feels like it's normal, but it's even a worse cartoon than the one we're at here. But we could easily imagine in 10 or 15 years we'll have the same resolution, the same everything in VR,
Yeah.
which is why people like Don Hoffman are now saying that basically we already live in a simulation.
Right.
We know what the resolution of our eyes are. We know what the computing power of the brain is. We'll be able to simulate all of that up the wazoo and end up essentially in the matrix.
We'll end up in the matrix, meaning like we will be able to kind of plug into our own simulator.
We'll be able to plug into something which is indistinguishable from not being plugged into whatever that is. Yes, VR will become that good.
Because VR hasn't really caught on. Not really.
Depends on who you hang out with.
But if we're looking at just the mass public, like remember when 3D was a big fad, selling 3D TVs? This is about like 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Everywhere you went, 3D TV, 3D, and they thought everyone was going to, for whatever reason, people don't like to put on goggles, and do that at home or put on the VR.
It wasn't good enough.
Mm.
The absolute leading edge of VR now is really good. Even things like an Oculus 2 or Oculus 3, they're games mostly, but
Right.
As resolution, particularly visual resolution, increases, it's very easy to forget that you're in VR.
Well, that's an interesting question. So I remember when The Hobbit came out, Peter Jackson did a 48 frames per second version of it. And we went to see that before seeing the 24 frames per second. And I remember sitting there in the theater, like it was almost, the visual was almost like I was tripping, right? It was just so hyper real. It made me feel uncomfortable.
Hmm.
And it took a while to get used to it. And then when I went back and watched the film again in 24 frames per second, I actually enjoyed that version better.
Yeah.
Can our brains handle like a one-on-one simulation of reality?
Well, you get used to it pretty quick.
Mhm.
So like it's true, a couple of years ago, there were a lot of superhero movies that were in 3D.
Mm-hmm.
And the color is souped up, and sometimes the frame rate is higher.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember after one of those movies had ended, I was walking outside and I was thinking, everything is so dull. It's like it's flat and dull, and I'm looking at the real world out there.
Yeah.
Because I had learned over the course of 2.5 hours of becoming used to the idea of a very vivid, very immersive environment, and I kind of got used to it and said, oh, this is pretty good.
Yeah.
And then you go outside and you think, ugh, I don't like this reality at all. Can somebody tune this up somehow or something?
That's why James Cameron keeps winning, because people just want to get back into that reality, right?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so the placebo effect, scientists seem to just generally accept this as, when studies after studies, tons of studies proving that if someone believes enough that a pill or whatever they're giving is to improve their health improves, whether it's a placebo a pill or not. And I wonder, is that evidence of itself that consciousness physically affects reality? Or is it something else? Am I misunderstanding the placebo effect?
Well, there's a difference then between consciousness as awareness,
Hmm.
internal experience, as compared to psychological reasons. So where we perceive reality through many, many filters.
Hmm.
I mean, just the last time I looked, like there's 100 known biases that affect what we actually end up seeing.
Okay.
Uh, the other thing is that our bodies are ultimately built out of DNA. DNA is very complicated, but the proteins is what creates the flesh of our body and our organs and everything.
Hmm.
That's only about 5% of our DNA. So 95% of DNA is what's called the intron sequence. It's non-coding. It doesn't create proteins. It's epigenetic switches,
Hmm.
essentially. So these are bits of DNA that are between the genes. That's why it's called intron sequence.
Yeah.
The intron sequence used to be called junk DNA because they didn't know what it did. Now we know that that portion of DNA is exceptionally sensitive to the environment, which includes the psychological environment. So if you are told repeatedly, or you, for whatever reason, you have this pill and this is going to cure you, that becomes an environmental push. And that will end up actually revising your genetic structure. And so, combination of education, belief, environment, diet, all kinds of things can reshape your genetic basis because it's essentially turning genes on and off. And so if you think of this, the physical structure is a bunch of proteins that have been created by the body,
Hmm.
and you have a way of tweaking it, go in with tweezers and turn this on, turn this off, and so on. You can literally reshape the body.
But it's still the mind, right? That's a part of that equation. The mind, because you can say yes, it's psychological, but it's the mind, which is so far it's this sort of intangible thing.
Yeah, you have to define the difference then between awareness, the mind, cognition. I mean,
Right.
there's many, many layers in there. So it is true that your belief, which
Hmm.
is a mental aspect,
Right.
that too can reshape your genetic basis and therefore your body as a result of turning on aspects of your intron sequence, which in turn affects your genes. So if somebody was highly depressed, their body eventually is not going to feel very good because their genetic makeup is being changed.
Hmm.
If they do something, whatever it happens to be, and they go on vacation or whatever, and they suddenly kind of lift that, they feel much, much better because the body, physical body, is now working a lot better
Right.
because now their intron sequence or epigenetics has switched them into another state.
Mm.
I mean, that's a simplistic way of thinking about it, but we now know that there are people doing genetic engineering as new kinds of therapies, including a company that I co-founded is doing this for psychiatric indications. Like we know one of the problems as you get older is neurodegeneration. The portions of your brain stop working so good, and you end up with things like dementia.
Right.
Well, we have a pretty good idea about how to fix that. It has to do with changing what's going on in the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that is able to create and store memories. So that becomes hyperactive, it starts falling apart. Well, we can repair that. And we do that in using genetic engineering techniques, which work directly on receptors in the brain.
Mm.
You can fix it memory comes back. So it has
I,
improved
I
even.
haven't heard of this. What, genetic engineering?
Oh, yeah.
Like,
So the leading edge now in not so much in standard pharmaceuticals, but every pharma company and lots of biotech companies are using methods to revise how genes are working in the body. So the ones that
mhm.
tend to be heard about in the press are things like sickle cell anemia
Yeah.
or COPD and some other diseases that are caused sometimes by a single gene that's just a mutant. It's not working right. So we can go in now and repair the gene. We can change it. So somebody who had sickle cell anemia no longer has that. It's gone.
Well,
It's
yeah, I guess for the longest time wasn't plaque the explanation, plaque that caused the
yeah,
dementia or Alzheimer's.
yeah, and that's almost certainly wrong. So it's not that this was a problem with correlation versus causation.
Hmm.
Is there additional kinds of plaque that show up in the brains of people who had Alzheimer's? Yes. Did it cause it? We're thinking probably not.
Hmm.
It may be a side effect where the brain is trying to protect itself using these plaques from something else. So, what's the something else? Could be bacteria, it could be a whole long list of things where what we're seeing then as the amyloid plaques and all of that stuff could be a side effect of what the body is trying to do to fix itself.
Where
That
does the gene splicing come in there? Like, is that something that's preventative only, or can it be
oh
an act?
no,
Yeah.
you can use different genetic methods now to replace genes that are defective and
Mhm.
literally fix it permanently. That's being used in some cases of serious illnesses that otherwise you would die, like fatal genetic mistakes that can be fixed. Uh,
So people today who, and I'm just thinking of someone in my own life who have been diagnosed with either dementia or Alzheimer's. There's a genetic solution on the horizon, or
on the horizon.
on the
Yeah.
horizon.
So we've got to the point now where we're ready to go into human clinical trials, but it costs a lot of money to do that. And we're talking about millions of dollars to do that. So it's difficult to raise money for new classes of treatments. We know at this point, because we're a preclinical company, that means before going into human trials.
Yeah.
From a preclinical perspective, we have an enormous amount of data that this will work. We also know that it works in human neurons because you can put human neurons in a dish. So we
Hmm.
know it works there. Getting to the next stage requires doing studies with non-human primates, euphemism for monkeys.
Yeah.
And you have to do that because it's required by the NIH in order to create a drug. And because it's the closest that you can come to human physiology and human brain structure because we're primates too.
Right.
Uh, we would like to avoid that because we don't want to harm anything. We don't want to use animals for testing, but we're obligated to. We have to.
Yeah.
So after we pass all of that, then we can do human clinical trials. We're pretty sure at this point, since we're not only using temporary fixes, we're using RNA, which tends to degrade after a while, so you would revert back to wherever you were. But it means for a period of weeks or months or longer, you can revise elements of the brain that have been falling apart as a result, usually of age. And you can repair that. And then we find, at least in mice and rats, which is what we generally use, uh, they get significantly improved memory, over 100% improvement.
I could use
And,
that, Dean,
and
honestly.
yeah,
Like,
and simultaneously, a significant reduction in anxiety,
see,
both at the same time.
that's really interesting. So, like, I'm kind of quite serious. So, during the pandemic, I don't know if it was exposure to coronavirus or what have you, but I was experiencing very intense brain fog to the point where I was starting to try different things, different diets, and finally my wife was like, try gluten free, and that made a big difference.
Hmm.
I'm also leaning much more towards eating more, not full time, but I'm eating more keto, and that seems to help out a little bit. I boost my vitamin D an extraordinary amount. That seems to be helping as well. But it's
Mhm.
kind of been an ongoing struggle. It's much improved. Um, and I there's so many factors that can go into these things. Doesn't matter, like, if someone's experiencing brain fog, doesn't matter what the cause is. Can or
Yeah.
can Yeah, okay.
Well, yeah. But the problem with brain fog is, like a lot of diseases, there are many, many reasons why that could happen. And so we're only very slowly beginning to figure out that first of all, that is the thing, because
Mhm.
for a long time people didn't even believe in long COVID. Now we see that
True.
it is an actual real thing,
Mhm.
and there are many reasons why you could end up with brain fog. And yeah, I've had friends who've had it too, and as academics, they couldn't do anything for 6 months.
Oh, it was intense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank
So
thank God for automaticity, like,
But yeah,
right?
this is why doctors usually default to take an aspirin and call me in the morning, because most of the time
Yeah,
we reset.
yeah,
Sometimes it takes longer. But can we figure out what that is and then develop genetic ways of souping up the system to fix it quicker?
right, right.
Absolutely, we can. Oh, and all it takes, in quotes, is money, is research.
Hey, Elon Musk and his Neuralink investment, you would think that he would want to, donate some of that money towards this sort of research because it could actually probably be integrated with the work he's doing with neuronet
You'd think so,
and everything.
wouldn't you?
Yeah. So, Dean, I want to get to some questions that were submitted in advance. So I have a question here from Cat Brooks, and it says, "Does Dean believe or have proof that healing energy work can actually benefit someone? So, like Reiki, quantum healing, things of that nature. Can one person transfer healing energy to another, or is it simply a placebo effect?"
Well, we did a study, and I'm aware of the literature on that, especially Reiki, Joe
Hmm.
Ray, therapeutic touch, and so on. So we did a study with people who were recruited, almost 200 people with carpal tunnel syndrome. So they had hand and wrist pain,
Okay.
one or both hands. Very difficult to treat. I mean, you can do surgery on it, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't.
Mm.
So we figured it was a good illness or disease model because it's pretty obvious. So we ended up with 17 different kinds of healers, like across the board, every kind of spiritual, energetic, psychic healer you can imagine. Each of them worked with one patient, or like generally over 200 patients, but the 17 people. So over a period of weeks, each of the healers worked with a batch, 5, 6, 7
Mhm.
patients. And we weren't tracking like who won the healing sweepstakes. We were just looking overall. Uh, Two things. One was how did pain change
Yeah.
in the people who were being healed. So a half an hour, that's all that they got from each healer. Well, so did pain change? Yes, extremely significant reduction in pain. And we traced people over 3 weeks, and it sustained. So whatever happened worked. We also asked people what were their expectations about this kind of healing, which gets to the placebo effect. There's no correlation, which says it wasn't placebo, because it wasn't that the people who expected it to work got significantly better, and the ones who said, I have no idea whether this is going to work, they also got better. So something about
Mhm.
the methods across the board helped reduce pain. And that is what you see generally when you look at the meta-analyses on many, many studies, mostly with Reiki, because that's been used the most
Yeah.
for these clinical trials. For pain relief, it does something for most people.
Have you ever had any subjective experiences yourself in any of these categories?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So healers are different. They have different talents, and some of them do better than others. But occasionally, a healer will do amazing things.
Hmm.
I mean, that's like you can feel something that feels energetic, except that we don't have instruments that can detect what that is. So that's why I say that
Right.
the energy that people talk about is the feeling of energy. It's felt energy, which is not the same as like if if I take some kind of an instrument and I'm looking for electric fields or something, that's not it. Something else. We don't know what that
Yeah.
something else is.
Well, I guess that's the problem in science, right? It's like we got protons, electrons, quarks, theoretic gravitons, and all these things. None of them seem to correlate. Anything that's been measured or theorized by physicists does not correlate with this kind of psychic phenomena. There's nowhere for them to start to go, okay, how do we measure whatever this is?
Yeah, that's a problem. And it's one of the reasons why it's resisted as well, because
Yeah.
we figure, well, we already know the four forces of nature, and we know
Mhm.
that what about energy, and we know about this and that. No, we don't. We know a few things that have certain regularities, but science, like step back from science as a process.
Mhm.
It's really good at observation. It gets better and better as we develop new instruments.
Yeah.
There's an assumption, especially in physics, but you see this in other disciplines as well. There's an assumption that that's all there is, which we know is not the case. Like we don't understand where consciousness comes from. So anybody who's presenting a theory of everything,
Mhm.
like the standard model in particle physics, well, yeah, that describes a subset of the physical world that we currently are able to measure.
You're right.
It leaves out huge chunks. And the other thing that's kind of annoying to me is that an astrophysicist will say, well, we know enough about the way that the universe works so we can predict what's happening in a galaxy that's on the other end of the universe. No, we don't. Have they never watched Star Trek? I mean, that's like the
Yeah.
whole point is you don't know what you don't know, but
Mhm.
there's kind of an arrogant assumption that, well, we have the equations and we keep testing it and everything
Yeah.
works out well. No, we know a subset, a special case.
Yeah.
So the example I like to use is up until about the beginning of the 20th century, late
Mhm.
1900s, uh, people working in physics were already advising their students not to go into physics because they already knew everything.
Yeah.
Like we already know all equations. It's finished. Well, everything changed around 1920, and a whole bunch of new physics came along.
Yep.
And so, if you asked somebody who was a working physicist around 1900, what do you think is going to happen? Like in the next 100 years, what are we going to get? Well, it's going to be more of the same. Well, so you get back to the same person 30 or 40 years later, it is so
Yeah.
radically different
Yeah.
that they would never, ever have guessed what's about to happen. So, what they were not paying attention to were the anomalies, the things that didn't quite fit, what they assumed we'll figure out someday. That is the history of science. It is always happening. So, are there anomalies today that people in academia, physics in particular, are not paying much close attention to? Absolutely, there are. And so, what is one of those areas? Psychic phenomena.
It's so interesting. I agree with you 100%. Scientists will essentially speculate on something like a Dyson sphere, right? Or the idea, like scientists, you hear them speak of, oh, type 3 or type 2 civilization will be able to harness the power of the sun or this and that. And it's like, but how? Well, we don't know. But, we just think that that's probably what's going to happen. And I don't see how that's any different than, it's actually worse, I think, than some of the parapsychological studies where you actually have some evidence in your hand to say that
Yeah,
there is something there. Could that something be that ties it all together? The Reiki, um, oh my gosh, precognition, all be part of the same force of consciousness that's underlying reality.
it may well be. Yeah. I mean, at least it's probably a major factor when we start realizing that reality is not just a physical thing.
Mm,
It's not just physics. It's something beyond physics. Uh, we still are at the very earliest stages of understanding the difference between a living system and a non-living system.
yeah.
Up until very recently, it was thought that only humans have consciousness. Well, then there's now pretty good evidence that most animals,
Yeah.
have some kind of degree of internal sense. And now plants and insects and virtually every form of sentient, anything that we consider to be a living creature,
Hmm.
has an internal state. That might all go all the way down to viruses, which is sort of halfway between a living and a non living thing. We don't know where that stops, which is why more and more scientists are beginning to entertain the idea of panpsychism, like everything, all the way down
It's
to
it's
electrons.
interesting you're hearing more scientists speak openly about that speculative theory.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I think idealism goes all the way back to like Socrates or Plato. I mean, it goes
oh
way
yeah,
back in
no,
time. Yeah.
they were, yeah, Plato, they were all idealist.
Right, right. So another question here I want to get in. Tiffany Mack asks, can consciousness influence physical reality through intention of observation?
Yes.
Okay. And we kind of touched on
The,
that a little bit earlier with your
read
study.
this.
The Science of Magic, your book, you go into
Yeah.
much deeper.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
have a long chapter on this whole thing about intention and
Yeah.
attention, and yeah, yeah.
When is the book coming out, Dean?
Today.
Today.
Yeah,
Literally today.
yeah.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. Um, then I would definitely have to get my hands on it. And I hope everyone listening follows your work because honestly,
And if you don't like to read, you can listen to the audiobook.
that's right. Hopefully, we can get more people reading these days. Those. I have one more question here, and do you have? I know you don't like the word proof. Do you have proof or believe that a loved one who has passed on can deliver signs in any way, shape, or form? Be the physical manifestations, a butterfly that lands on you when you're thinking of that person, or maybe a very realistic dream. Any kind of signs.
Well, I'm familiar with the literature on evidence for survival after bodily death. There's a very large literature. There's something like 8 or 9 different categories of evidence that people can point to. I would say on composite, it's intriguing as to that maybe there is something that survives.
Hmm.
There's also a lot of problems with how we interpret that data, because for one thing, it's very strongly influenced by our motivated need to want to believe that something continues, that we continue, and that loved ones continue. So that's one thing that's part of it. The more important part of it is that the really compelling evidence for survival, it is not clear where the evidence comes from. And what I mean is that if somebody reports a near death experience, it sounds pretty good, like they were dead and they had something happen. We don't know when it happened. So the people will report that the person was brain dead and they drained all the blood out of the body, and yet they saw all this stuff. Well, we don't know when they saw that.
Yeah.
We're assuming that the person is literally dead, 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 and that's when the experience happened. But there is zero evidence that that is the case. So people then say, well, but I had an out of body experience. We don't know when that happened. Not only that, we know that in some cases of remote viewing, you could have the sense that you're actually not in your body anymore, but it's just a remote viewing. We project because we're projecting all of this.
Right.
The case is true in mediumship. A medium will have the experience of communicating with a departed loved one, and we know through experiments that the information that they're getting is valid, like proxy sitters and all the methods.
Yeah.
So we know that the information is valid. We don't know where the information comes from. Maybe it's telepathy. Maybe it's clairvoyance. So what this says is you have this big body of evidence about survival. A case can be made that 100% of it comes from the living because it's the living that is reporting it. We don't have dead people, truly dead people, who are coming back with information
Okay.
because all of it can be reinterpreted then as it's psi in the living. And so that's where I'm stuck on this. I know the literature as well as anybody who's read all of it. I also have read all the psi literature, and I don't know what the limits of psi information is. Like we apparently can get information about anything from anywhere, any space and time. Really talented people can do that. So if somebody has a synchronicity where something happens which they interpret as a communication after death,
Yeah.
go for it. I mean, if it provides comfort and you get the sense that this is Uncle Joe who's trying to tell me something, there's nothing wrong with accepting that. The question is, if you step away from that and somebody objectively looks at it and say, well, do I believe then that that actually is Uncle Joe doing that? The answer is we don't know. We can't objectively tell that for a lot of reasons. The main one being that when somebody asks a similar question about, well, could that have been telepathy? Well, that we can go into the lab
Yeah.
with living people, and
Right.
we can show that that is the case. We don't know how to show that with somebody who is actually dead,
Mm,
or even to maybe it's not a living person; it's a non-human, invisible entity of some type, like what channelers talk
right.
about.
Yes, like something like ghosts, spirits, that sort of thing are difficult to
Yeah,
study. Um,
and even with ghosts. So earlier in my career, I did a number of haunting investigations in ancient castles where bad things happened, and there are stories of ghosts for
right.
a long
Sure.
time. So the way we would do that is we knew we were going into a castle that had some kind of a bad history. And there's certain areas of the castle which were known to people would see weird stuff, but they didn't tell us where. We didn't want to know where. We don't know what. We only know that this is
Mm,
maybe a haunted castle, maybe not.
right.
So each of us goes in by ourselves, and we keep notes in it. Usually 3 o'clock in the morning, because that's your hormonal system is different. You're more sensitive to such things.
Mm,
And we keep track of where do we experience an anomaly.
yeah.
Many times people will come back and say, it was that room on that floor in front of this spot over here. I felt something weird.
Hmm.
I mean, so people are, yeah, they're echoing what was said over the many centuries. Sometimes people will see the white lady or the gray lady or a thing that is this shadowy shape of humanoid, whatever.
Sure.
So then the next day I go in with a bunch of instrumentation and say, well, what's different that we can pick up physically in this space? More often than not, it's
Mm,
either an electromagnetic anomaly, it's a spatial anomaly, meaning that we expect the floor to be flat, but at certain spots it actually dips a little bit and you can feel disoriented, or it's magnetic. So one of those three is like 90% of the time. It's not 100%. Sometimes we're picking up weird stuff and we don't know why, but about 90% of the time, the place where people feel disoriented and have weird experiences can be explained by some aspect of the environment,
right. Okay.
including in very old castles.
Yeah.
So castles turned out to be interesting because a lot of them, especially in Scandinavia and the UK, were made out of granite. Granite is naturally radioactive. And so some of the places that we found where people feel weird,
Hmm.
naturally higher than average radioactive decay happening at that spot.
Wow.
And so you go in and you're trying to sense how is one place different than the other. You can
Right.
feel
Right.
that.
Yeah. Why do I feel off
Yeah,
in
we're
that space?
disoriented.
Disoriented. Yeah. Um, is there a chance that some of the older building structures are made of materials that might actually pick up radio frequencies and kind of act as like a, you know,
Yeah, and very common in newer structures is that the place where somebody feels something odd, if you look outside the building, that's where a step down transformer is. So it's pulling in 50,000 volts and turning it into 110 or
right,
whatever,
right.
and it's producing a huge magnetic field,
Yeah.
and you can feel that too.
Dean, if you can leave us with one thought, what would it be?
Well, first of all, the experiences that we're talking about, I mainly specialize in psychic experience.
Hmm.
Uh, Very strong overlap with traditional magical ideas, which is why in my latest book I spent a little bit more time talking about traditional esoteric magic as the same thing as psychic phenomena
Hmm.
from a different cultural perspective and different language. But the phenomena are the same. The other thing is that last Tuesday, what is it? Yeah, last Tuesday, a week ago from when we were talking, I gave a talk at Harvard Medical School. I was invited to a conference where it was about consciousness. And the miracle was that I said, well, can I talk about psychic phenomena and maybe even magic? And they said, yeah. So is the world changing a little bit so
Sure.
that you can talk about this stuff now and people's heads don't explode in the academic world? And the answer is yes. And people loved it. I could tell from the reaction and from the audience that they're really, really into it. So what this tells me is that we've known for a long time that the experiences happen to everyone. It's actually rare to find somebody who has never had any psychic type experience. They may not think of it as psychic,
Right.
but that most people have these things. So science is slowly developing the competency to be able to test and find out whether in principle some of these things really are non-local consciousness experiences.
Right.
And that in turn tells us something about the nature of consciousness, and more importantly, its role in the physical world. So one of the points of my latest book then is saying that the scientific paradigm changes very slowly over time. It's pretty rare that you find an actual paradigm shift.
Mm-hmm.
We are in the midst of one right now. And the way you can see this is through the number of mainstream thought leaders across the board in the academic world who are able to talk about consciousness openly now as a problem of interest. That's new. What's even newer
Okay.
is the idea that I can be invited to places like Harvard and other mainstream outlets who are now seeing this as a topic that's interesting to talk about. That's
Yes.
different also.
Yeah.
So we're in the midst of a change.
It's amazing how things have changed. If, do you know Beatrice Villarreal? I think that's her name. She's a astronomer. Um, she had studied these old plates, astronomical plates that were taken from like the 50s and early 60s, that I think mostly from Harvard University, and found these kind of these lights that were anomalies that were captured in the sky that after studying and studying and studying it, they could not account for, because at the time we didn't have, but one or two, Russia got there first with satellites in there. So okay, so we rule out satellites, and then they would have these anomalies kind of show up, and there was no other explanation that they can determine other than something that's artificial in the sky during that period.
Mm.
And she just had a paper finally accepted at a peer-reviewed journal. And I just remember the chatter leading up to that. She was extraordinarily frustrated. Like, she was disinvited to conferences, like, really mistreated, but finally made that breakthrough, where their work is being taken seriously. And I think that's fantastic, which makes me wonder, because you're focusing so much on parapsychology, and then you have this whole ufological movement that's going on. Are they kind of in tandem? Or is that just a coincidence? It's just our minds collectively as a society accepting all things.
A little of both.
Mm.
It's a little of both. It's mainly because we're hearing now and we've known for a long time that there are aspects of consciousness, mostly telepathic
Mm-hmm.
reports of people who've had some kind of close encounter with a UFO. They get telepathic communications. So it mostly has been pushed. It's been pushed off by government, and it's not actually so much government anymore. But there have been, let's say, legacy programs that have tried to cast this into it's Farmer Bob who had a little bit too much marijuana that day.
Yeah.
And so but that's not the case. I mean, there are plenty of people in plenty of places who have said things like they're getting messages from these lights in the sky and it's telepathic and blah blah blah. So there is an overlap.
Mm.
Uh, are both of these stories going to break? Like we're waiting for disclosure? Probably not. So at this meeting after the conference at Harvard, I went to another meeting at MIT, and at the meeting was somebody who was in charge of one of the early UAP investigation projects of the government that was highly classified at the time. And so somebody asked him, well, are we on the verge of disclosure? And he had a response which was kind of unexpected, and he couldn't follow it up. He said, it's worse than you know. So, of course, we had to say your reaction like that. Well, what do you mean by that? What's
Right.
worse than we know? So he exchanged looks with somebody else who was involved in that, and he shook his head and he said, I can't go into it. So I have no idea what that means.
I don't either,
But,
and I still want to know.
well,
Right?
what's
Like,
worse than we know? I mean,
yeah.
so I think what he's probably referring to is that In the congressional hearings, we hear people talking about interesting things.
Right.
Some of them I know are quite credible in what they're talking about.
Hmm.
But then even in Congress, they'll say, well, how do you know about these biologics or these whatevers? And say, well, I can't, I have to tell you that
Yeah.
behind closed doors. What are they saying? Well, we don't know what they're saying, but it's worse than we know. I don't know what that means. It's just that it makes it even more intriguing that there's something else going on. Some of it may or may not overlap with psychic stuff because we
Yeah.
also know that for a very long time there has been disinformation coming from not only our government but other governments
Right.
that have been designed to deflect attention
Yeah.
from the fact that these phenomena exist.
Well, I think maybe I'll interpret it just to make myself feel better. That it's the worst part is that it's so much that the dissemination of that information would just be such a paradigm shift, and it would may cause existential crisis in a large number of the populace. Maybe that's what the fear might be. Because I
Yeah.
always imagine, like, let's say we're living in a simulation, right? What if the UFO, if that's a thread that you pull on solving the mystery of the UFO, reveals the fact, if that thread takes you to the revelation that we're living in a simulation, you would want to cover that up because you would be deathly afraid of how we would all react, right?
Yeah, so that is one of the scenarios that people would panic. I don't think that would actually happen now. I mean, because for a while there was this big flap about drones that
Hmm.
were flying over cities, and
Yeah.
then so you look at the comments on those, and then people on social media, and every other person was saying, "Well, does this mean I still have to pay my rent?"
Yeah, exactly.
It's like
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
become so blasé at this point
Right.
between the way the entertainment portrays this stuff and
Yeah.
just endless stories of things happening, but nothing ever seems to occur. That even if on the nightly news that
Yeah.
was a credible news source, you see something land at the White House, and I mean, like most people, A, wouldn't believe it,
Right.
no matter what,
Yeah.
and B, even if they did believe it, they'll still say, "Well, does this mean? Well, is this going to change the price of eggs?" What it, that it's showing that we're in such a strange world now where
Hmm.
nobody knows what to believe anymore.
Yeah. The
And so
first thought's not going to be I should quit my job.
maybe, well, like, are they here to eat us? Are they going to come? Are we now part of the meal, or are they come here? They're going to
uh,
bring new chickens.
yeah.
What's There'll be a lot of questions like that, I
Right. Right.
assume. There may be some disruption within religion, unless the people coming out saying, "By the way, now we're all Catholic," or something. I mean, we don't know what the effect would be, but would there be
Hmm.
panic? It is true that under some circumstances, people will panic at anything.
Yeah.
Will it last? No. Even panic doesn't last unless you can't buy eggs. And then apparently everybody just goes apeshit.
Right. Exactly. It's eggs is the red line. All right.
You've got, if you can't get eggs, I mean, forget gasoline and bread and everything
Yeah.
else. You got to have eggs. And then if you have the eggs, everything is fine.
Well, we feel better
So
when the price of eggs go down because here in the Hudson Valley, man, sometimes it gets expensive.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
you're paying $1 an egg. Well, then no,
Right. Yeah.
you can't have eggs anymore.
Um, Dr. Radin, thank you so much for coming on Mystic Lounge. I really, really appreciate this. To find out more about Dr. Dean Radin, you can go to his website, deanradin.com. And you can also find your book, the magic of the science of magic,
Right.
on your website. Okay.
Available in all stores.
Available in all stores. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you want to find out more, you can follow me on Instagram at Coffee and UFOs podcast. And this podcast is rebroadcast on the Unnext Network every Thursday night, 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Friday mornings. Until next time, everyone, peace and love, and live in the mystery.